Hey, welcome back to Project Addiction. So today we got an interesting vehicle in the shop. It's an L300, but yeah, it's a wrong side drive L300. So this one here is from Germany, and the owner is somewhere down here.
How's it going?
So meet Thomas. He's been traveling around the, well, basically the world in this van, and is currently residing here in Canada with it. But it's got some problems, so that's what it's here today for us to take a look at. So we've got to adjust the rear brakes. We're going to try and fix the fuel gauge, which is reading at 0, and we'll probably do a cap and rotor on it as well. So stay tuned, and we'll get going on this. Okay, so first thing I think we're going to tackle is the fuel gauge. So if we turn it on here, there is fuel in the vehicle, but you can see that gauge isn't moving. So Thomas has already been down there trying to see what he can find, and it looks like the wiring to the tank is getting pretty bad. So we're going to pull off that wiring and inspect it and see if maybe that's just what's causing the problem. Okay, well that was a little bit of a chore to get out. This van has a aftermarket air heater put in it. The original heater, for whatever reason, they tapped the tank right beside this plug, making it almost impossible to take this plug off. So we put in another one a while ago, and now that line's redundant, but unfortunately it's still in the way. But that should be connected to this. So there's a good possibility that that is a good reason why the fuel gauge isn't working right now. So we're going to try and find a way to clean these wires up and reattach them to the pins, but that's going to be a little bit difficult because the pins are pretty corroded and pretty small. So we'll take it apart and see what we can do. So first thing I need to do is try and de-pin these. So that means actually getting, I don't know if you can even see it here, getting this pin out of the plug. Now on this particular plug, there's a small release just down on the inside. And it's going to be very difficult to see it here, but you can see I've got pick, and just on the inside here, put the pick in and pull down, and that should release the pin. So now we got the pins out of there. You can see it's all covered in green corrosion, so that would have been causing a lot of resistance, on top of the fact the wires finally broke. So we're going to clean them up, and all we're going to do is we're going to throw them in this with just a little bit of regular white vinegar, and we'll leave it sitting in there for a bit, and that's going to get rid of all the corrosion and clean those pins up for us. So while I'm doing the electrical, Thomas is going to try and gain access to the cap and rotor so we can get that out and see if we can find a match for it. Unfortunately, Thomas's van is completely camperized, and because of that, it means that there's some disassembly required in the back just to be able to get the engine cover out. Hopefully Thomas will let us do a video on his van later on down the road here, because the setup in this thing is absolutely incredible, and I'm sure a lot of you would like to see it. He's got some pretty interesting ideas. Every inch counts, as he says. If you just look at this, there is no wasted space in this van. Because we're reusing the old pins, they've already been crimped, so obviously we can't recrimp them again. So what we're going to do here is I've opened up the second crimp, which usually goes on to the insulation, and we're just going to solder to where the crimp normally crimps to the wire, and then we'll pinch the back portion of the pin back over the insulation. Okay, so we've got that back in, but I don't know if the wires are in the right order. Unfortunately, they were taken off before, and Thomas can't remember if you put them back on in the right order. So let's turn it on and see if we've got anything. Okay, well, it's moving, but is the tank full? No, no. Okay, so we're gonna try to reorder those wires again, see if we can get it to read properly, but at least we have movement now, so that's a good start. Okay, try it again.
It's coming. Yeah.
Okay, so that takes care of the fuel gauge issue. Quite often when the fuel gauge stops working, the tank side is where you need to look at. I know a lot of people immediately assume, the gauge itself is toast, but consider the fact that that fuel tank is sitting there exposed out in the elements all the time. It's getting soaked in mud, water, salt, and those wires are also getting completely covered in all of that crap too. So eventually you get a whole bunch of corrosion on the wires. They either fall apart like they did here, or they just get so much green junk built up on them, the resistance ends up so high, the gauge stops working. So if your gauge isn't working, check the tank side first, because that's most likely going to be a problem. That's not to say it's always a problem, but 90% of the time, if you clean up those wires, make sure you've got a good ground, that tends to fix the issue. So we're going to move on to the next thing, and that is fixing the park brake. Well, that is after Thomas reassembles the interior.
Yeah, there's no handbrake yet.
Well, before we throw this thing back in, I figure I'll show you what's going on. This is the distributor cap. So this van's obviously a gas engine, the 2.4 gasser instead of the diesel. So has a dizzy cap, and these pins right here, they're wear and tear part. And this is part of your basic maintenance that needs to be done. Now this one does need to be changed. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this on the camera, but you can see how the pins are actually starting to corrode. As they corrode, your connection gets worse and worse, and you can start having ignition problems. So this one does need to be replaced. Unfortunately, nobody local has one in stock, so we're going to put the old one back in, and Thomas is going to have to deal with that later on. And now that we've got the fuel gauge dealt with, we're going to move on to the thing that most of you probably came here to watch, and that's actually how to adjust the rear brakes. Now, the reason that we're adjusting the rear brakes is, and I'm sure some of you have run into this before, yeah, so that park brake is pulling up way, way, way too high. Now, there is adjustment on the park brake itself, but that's pretty much been maxed out, and the fact is, when you put that park brake on, it's barely holding the van anyways, so that means that the rear brake shoes are definitely out of adjustment. So we're going to adjust the rear brake shoes today, adjust the park brake, and hopefully that way the van will actually be able to sit on a hill without risk of it rolling. So first thing that we need to do is get the rear wheels up in the air, wheels off, so we have access to those brake drums. Okay, with the drum off, we got a pretty good view of the entire brake system here. So these use a drum brake. You got your shoes, your wheel cylinder, and way back here is a star wheel, and that's the adjuster. But one thing I'm noticing here is this spring is attached to the automatic adjuster. Now, yes, these brakes are supposed to automatically adjust. No, it doesn't really work very well, but it doesn't work at all when the adjuster isn't making any contact with the star wheel. So we're going to pull this apart and see if we can figure out why that is so far away. And then we'll readjust everything after. Okay, so I've got everything loosened off here, and as you can see, none of the park brake mechanism is actually moving at all. So not only are the brakes out of adjustment, but the park brake mechanism is completely rusted up and seized. So we're gonna have to get this out of here, try clean it up and rebuild it so everything moves smoothly, and then we'll go reassemble. Okay, so we've got that all rebuilt and cleaned up now. Once the spring's in place, that'll stay where it belongs, but everything moves as it should. So all I've done is I've loaded up the pin with a bunch of anti-seize to hopefully help ward off some of the corrosion and rust in the future. Inevitably, it'll likely do it again because all of the CAD plating and everything on these parts is, well, long gone. So we're gonna get this back in there and we'll reassemble the brake shoes and then readjust everything. Okay, we got the brakes all reassembled. And I did have to cheat and use a proper brake tool. You might not have one, so you might have to fight with these lower springs a little bit. But as you can see, our star wheel is now making contact with the adjuster as it should be. So now all we need to do is put the drum back on, and we're going to adjust that star wheel bit by bit until we get just a little bit of drag on the brakes. So that's all adjusted. And as you saw, just place the drum back on the brakes and then hit it with a hammer around the outside a few times just to set the shoes in place. And what we're looking for is just a small amount of drag on the brakes. So if you listen very closely, you can just hear the brake shoes making contact with the drum. If you go too far and you find that the brake's dragging really hard, all you need to do is go in there, push down on the auto adjuster so it's not touching the star wheel, and then wind the star wheel back in a little bit and start over again. So we're going to put this drum back on. I'm going to rebuild the other side, and then we'll adjust the park brake itself. Yep. And for the final bit, we're gonna have to go inside the vehicle and make the actual adjustments on the e-brake cable itself. To access the brake cable, there's a Phillips up front here and one at the back. You can do this with the seat in place, but it's a little bit awkward. Honestly, I would just take the seat out as 4 bolts. And now we have access to the cable itself. So this is the cable adjuster, and you're gonna need 2 10mm wrenches to make the adjustments. And basically all Thomas is looking for here is to take up the slack in the cable. So if you can pull it up and you feel the resistance immediately, you know you're there. So we've still got a little bit of slack, so you can tighten it up a wee bit more. And once you're happy that all the slack has been removed from the cable, make sure you tighten down the jam nut, and that's why you need the 2 wrenches. And that's pretty much it for the adjustments. So now it's just a matter of reassembling the interior, and this job is completed. So hopefully you found that helpful. Don't forget, hit that like and subscribe, and otherwise we'll see you next time. Have a good one.